has left a devastation of wreckage behind. But the sad part about it is that after the storm has ceased, thousands of uninsured homes were in Helene's path. The United States crumbling flood insurance system faces a new test after Hurricane Helene. Tyrone Bowman live. The Washington Post wrote an excellent piece. It was written by Kevin Crow, Shannon Osaka, and Molly Hennessy Fisk. These three individuals contributed to the article that I'm about to leave. And always remember, by the grace of God, we were spared Hurricane Helene. Empathy and compassion must be at hand. And whatever we can do to help those that have been left behind after this wreckage, we must do what we must. According to the Washington Post, in Buncombe County, North Carolina, where an entire town disappeared beneath floodwaters, less than 1% of households had flood insurance. In Unicoi County, Tennessee, where dozens of residents were stranded atop a hospital roof as waters rose, it was under 2%. On average, just a tiny fraction of households in the inland counties hit hardest by Hurricane Helene, and its remnants had flood insurance according to a Washington Post analysis. According to a Washington Post analysis of recent data from the National Flood Insurance Program. Matter of fact, let me read that again. On average, just a tiny fraction of households in the inland counties hit hardest by Hurricane Helene, and its remnants had flood insurance, according to a Washington Post analysis of data from the National Flood Insurance Program. Across 7 affected states, only 0.8% of homes in inland counties affected by the storm had flood insurance. By contrast, 21% of homes in coastal counties in those areas had coverage. The Post estimated the share of homes with flood insurance by using policy counts as of October 1st provided by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and housing unit counts from the U.S. Census Bureau. Experts say the lack of insurance will prove deeply damaging for those households in the years to come, adding to the overall toll of the devastating storm. So far, there have been at least 213 deaths confirmed in 6 states as of Thursday. Available disaster assistance funds are largely intended to pay for temporary shelter, food, and water, not to rebuild homes. And thanks to a combination of outdated policies and high prices, most people don't know they should enroll in flood insurance or can't afford it. Without insurance, people struck by floods have to rely on a network of complicated federal programs or aid from nonprofits to rebuild their lives. The Individual Assistance Program, run by FEMA, can help provide urgent resources, but is capped at around $42,500 for housing and $42,500 for other costs. Most recipients get far less. As of Thursday morning, FEMA listed 108 counties in 5 states where people are eligible for this aid. It's something people don't want to think about, said Craig Landry, a professor of agriculture and applied economics at the University of Georgia. Of the risk of catastrophic flooding, people have an optimistic perception of disaster assistance, he added, and in reality, it's not that generous. The Post analysis shows that many of the counties affected by Helene's flooding have seen declining rates of flood insurance coverage in the past decade. In some cases, around half of flood insurance policies have been dropped. Stephanie Buchanan, a resident of Bakersville, North Carolina, didn't know she didn't have flood insurance until her belongings had been swept away in Rising Creek waters. Buchanan and her husband fled out the back door and watched the water rise 2 feet up into their home, ruining furniture and dragging their possessions into the garbage. She called her homeowner's insurance company only to learn that her policy didn't cover floods. In Mitchell County, home to Bakersville, FEMA reported just 31 flood insurance policies for more than 8,600 housing units. Nobody said anything about it, Buchanan said in a phone interview. The 47-year-old has lived in the Bakersville area her entire life and can't remember any similar disasters. I've never faced anything like this, she said. Is someone going to help us? Are we going to be able to have a home? The lion's share of flood insurance in the United States comes through FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program. For homes that are in the 100-year floodplain or that have a 1% or greater chance of flooding every year, this insurance is legally required to obtain a mortgage and can pay up to $250,000 for structures and $100,000 for contents. But experts say the flood maps used by the national program are outdated, leaving many areas that should have flood insurance without it. They don't include flooding from small waterways, things like creeks, tributaries, streams, and Jeremy Porter, head of climate inspections or implications research at the First Street Foundation, which models climate risk. They don't include heavy precipitation as a source for flooding. That means events like the surge of Helene flooding that struck inland areas last week are almost entirely ignored, leaving residents to choose for themselves whether they want to buy private flood insurance. Jess Dixon, a mural artist in Sugar Grove, North Carolina, said in a phone interview Wednesday that she didn't get flood insurance when she bought her single-story brick home 2 years ago because the area hadn't flooded in recent years. There was a flood across the street from me, but it had never risen anywhere close to this before, she said. Wherever I bought the house, or whenever I bought the house, it was not considered a flood plain. It's just so wildly expensive here that it just seems unnecessary. Not many people can afford it in this area. It's kind of a low-income area. Stormwater rose a foot in the first 10 minutes, ultimately reaching 4 feet into Dixon's attic crawl space. I haven't had time to call my insurance, she said, as she and her boyfriend gutted the house. I'm trying to figure out if FEMA will cover anything. My major focus has been trying to salvage as much as I can from the house, she said. Dixon has been staying with friends in nearby Blowing Rock, hopping around to make room for others, to make room for others displaced by the storm. We have a tent set up in my backyard if worse comes to worse. We did just get power back today, but I'm scared to turn it on, she said. The mountains are just not built for flooding. Jeff Jackson, the interim senior executive of the National Flood Insurance Program, said in a statement, flood risk is underappreciated across the nation, even in flood-prone areas. That's a challenge we continue to face and will continue to work on as we remain committed to closing the flood insurance gap across the nation. Right now, it's important that survivors of Helene file their flood and or homeowners insurance claims immediately. Jackson added, I urge those who are uninsured to register for FEMA disaster assistance now. Many people will end up rebuilding in flood-prone areas, given that the real estate market has a short memory, said Landry, the University of Georgia professor. While housing prices often drop following major flood events, as buyers account for the cost of flood insurance, research shows that effect disappears after 5 or 6 years. The assistance program from FEMA for individuals is intentionally not designed to make people financially whole after a disaster, said Caroline Kolsky, an expert in flood insurance and associate vice president for economics and policy at the Environmental Defense Fund and Advocacy Group. Most people tend to get only a few $1,000s from individual assistance, she added. Samantha Montano, a professor of emergency management at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy said survivors must navigate a web of complicated red tape to even get that amount of funding. Some disaster victims will submit 5 or 6 appeals after being denied the first time. People will describe it as the second disaster just because of how difficult it is to navigate, she said. While additional congressional funding can help close the gap, that money can take years to be deployed. In the meantime, residents will be forced to wait in whatever temporary housing they can find. Many experts say the country needs to impose much more sweeping requirements for flood insurance. Congress needs to require everybody to have flood insurance, much like we require everybody to have car insurance. Montano said, and in my opinion, they need to raise the amount of money FEMA is able to give people for individual assistance. For now, though, as many areas of the country are pummeled by severe weather, researchers say the insurance system is lagging behind. I don't think we're appreciating how much flood risk is changing over time and how quickly, Kolsky said, and we're certainly not talking to people about it. Don't forget to subscribe to Tyrone Bowman Live. This program, I will cover stories that nobody else will cover. So hopefully, everybody will get the help that they need. Never surrender. Never quit.